Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our podcast, Law That Leads. We're very excited to welcome Andrei Iakimtchik from Chateau Gardens here on season 2. Chateau Garden are your local experts in garden suites, which Andrei is going to tell us a little bit more about what those are. But just by way of background, he is a seasoned professional in the construction industry, working on everything from high-end additions to custom homes ranging up to $3 million and now to modern garden suites. He takes a lot of pride in his ability to navigate the often complicated bureaucracy of permit applications and actually getting them, as well as navigating deferring municipal regulations to make sure that your project moves as smoothly as possible from start to finish. Andrei's passion is building living spaces that aren't just functional, but also very beautiful and adding value to both your property and lifestyle. So whether it's a large custom home or a compact garden suite, he's committed to delivering quality craftsmanship every step of the way. Without further ado, let's welcome Andrei. Hi, Andrei. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
We're very excited to talk all about garden suites. I know with your business, this is a very niche area in the real estate market. So tell us a little bit more about what you do.
So we provide a full service in terms of building garden suites that involves also applying for permits, designing it, and any decorations or any cleanups that usually come after all the construction is done and everything in between.
That's perfect. And how do you, when someone calls you for the first time, what kind of advice do you give them? What is your starting point?
Usually when people call us, they have some questions. Most of the time they ask, can we build a garden suite? And that's what I kind of start with. We figure out where they're located because every place has kind of different rules and different regulations. And based on that, we kind of go into whichever direction they want, whether they want a larger one for, maybe some family members, or if it's just something for rent that they want, depending on the size of the backyard they have. There are lots of factors that go into it.
That's amazing. And in terms of when someone says, or just from your experience, how long would you say it's from start or the time that you get this call to the time where they're getting keys for this garden suite or secondary unit?
So that depends on what they already have. In some cases, we have people calling us saying, we have the permit, we just want somebody to build it. In that case, it would be about 6 months from the time we start to the time we finish construction. If it's kind of someone that doesn't have any experience or doesn't really know much about garden suites, then it might take a couple of weeks for us to figure out exactly what they want to build, where, and so on. About 2 to 3 months on all the permits and everything that needs to be done ahead of construction. And then another 6 months for that construction. So 10 months or so for those kind of people. So it really depends.
Okay. And then in terms of permits, I'm sure you deal with different procedures, different people, different timelines. So tell us a little bit more about that. How do you navigate? And I don't know, is it like the rest of real estate where the rules are always constantly changing, so you have to keep up?
Absolutely. It's bureaucracy just like any other business.
Right.
So we normally start with the municipality where the person lives, because every city and even some areas within the city would have different regulations and different zoning requirements. And once we know that, then we get the specific requirements for that address from the zoning department. Based on that, we provide the customer with the options that they have in terms of what sizes they can build, what kind of height, what type of building, because those also vary. And from there, we provide or we apply for the permits, we make the designs, and all of those have to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? They have to fulfill the requirements that the city sets out. And that's kind of how we navigate the system.
Okay. And then I know we've had this conversation previously, but for our listeners, how do you find, or I should say, the difference in dealing with the GTA where it's, under the umbrella of Toronto. And then when you're dealing with a smaller municipality, which might be...
Absolutely. So in Toronto, and the GTA is actually several cities. So for example, Mississauga or Vaughan or Richmond Hill, they don't fall under the same kind of zoning or permit requirements as Toronto, the main city of Toronto. And in Toronto, as I mentioned to you prior to our chat here, the main kind of process of applying for permits and reviewing them has been largely automated and systematized. So you have a website where we submit the application, we have all the requirements that they need, and everything is done online or at most over the phone. So it's a fairly easy process, although sometimes hiccups happen and it might take a while. In the smaller cities, it's a hit or miss, I would say. In some cases, it's a very small department. You go in with printed out documents, they take them from you, and within a couple of days you have your answer. In some cases, what may happen is the person who's responsible for that particular area or that particular review is not available, and they only have that one person. So you might have to wait a couple of weeks just to submit the application. So in that respect, there is kind of pros and cons in both areas.
Yeah. So I guess your advice, like us, would change on a case-by-case basis.
Absolutely. There is no one-fits-all advice, unfortunately.
But I guess it's a little bit easier when you're describing your services to someone. So when they come to you and they say, I want to build this garden suite, what options do you give them in terms of their uses, the sizes, all of that? Tell us a little bit more about that.
So here we usually ask the person, what do they want to use it for? Because most people don't come to us with just kind of like, oh, we heard a garden suite and we want one. They usually have some idea, whether it's we have, or we're bringing our parents from overseas and we want them to live close by. Sometimes it may be an older couple who have children that maybe went to university, they graduated, and they kind of want their own privacy.
Or cannot afford to buy a home.
Especially in this economy. So that's another option. And then we also have couples that just want to rent out some property to get an extra income every month.
Right.
So
to pay for the high interest rates.
Exactly, for the ever-increasing rates.
Yeah.
So those are kind of our main three categories of customers. And based on that, we advise, we recommend having a basement and 2 floors in order to maximize the rental potential. Or if it's, they're elderly parents, you don't want them walking up and down the stairs. It might be just a bungalow. So based on that, that's how we advise our customers.
It's amazing. And I'm sure you get this question a lot in terms of financing, because last year there was an announcement by the federal government about building a secondary unit. So when you go onto the website, it's very detailed in terms of like measurements and all of that. So do you find that everybody has kind of just heard this and is calling you about it? Or do you find that people are a little bit more informed in terms of seeing whatever we've seen here, the whole package, and then kind of have follow-up questions?
So sometimes we have people that never even heard of garden suites. They just call us saying, hey, we heard about this secondary suite program. What is that? What does that involve? I heard I can get some money. That's when we kind of explain to them what the program is made for. In some cases, people have heard of the garden suites, and now they kind of realize that they can get extra money from the government to help them with construction. So we have both kind of customers. And there's also different options with financing. We've partnered with several mortgage brokers and different firms that provide, whether it's a secondary mortgage or an extra line of credit that they can take out specifically for construction or for building a garden suite. And then they're able to use sometimes equity in their home to refinance it and build this garden suite, which when rented out would be basically paying for any extra mortgage or any extra expenses that they have, plus some additional cash flow monthly.
So if someone is coming to you and says there has to be the permit process as well as the financing process, Do you have a procedure in place? Do you sort of say, let's do this first and then we tackle this? Or do you do them simultaneously before the project starts?
So usually we try to figure out what kind of financing the person has, because once we start the process in terms of applying for permits, getting the drawings and everything, it needs to go smoothly. Otherwise, any delays in application or in construction can cause significant price increases down the line. And if you'd like, we can talk about those specifics in a bit. But to answer your main question is, we figure out the financing portion first. Once that's clear and we know exactly how we plan to proceed, that's when we move on to the actual architectural and design requirements.
Oh, great. Tell us a little bit more about what you're going to mention.
Of course. So the thing that many people don't know about construction is it can be very fickle, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And here is just a couple of examples. Let's say you start building a garden suite, you applied for your permits, and then you realize that you have renters that still need 2 months to move out. And this is maybe happening in September. So they move out in November, but now it's kind of getting cold and winter, close to the winter time. In order to start the foundation, you need to pour concrete. Now, many companies, in fact, all companies, they use special concrete for winter, which costs a little bit more. It adds about 10%. So that's just concrete. Then every aspect also adds another 10-15% to the cost, because now it's done in winter time. And all of that is because of that 2 months that you delayed the construction. Whereas if you started back in September, you would have avoided that increase in costs. In some cases, what might also happen is the weather. You want to start the construction, and because you delayed for a little bit because you're figuring out your finances, or maybe you wanted to wait for like vacation to end, something. Now the weather was great during that maybe month or so, and then afterwards it started raining every other day. So now because of the rains, you have to wait, and that could extend your construction quite significantly. So every little bit could affect kind of the main project. That's something that people need to be aware of.
Oh, wow. And if someone is calling you in terms of saying, I don't know where to start with this project, but this is what I want, I assume that would be part of the advice that you provide for them. Of
course. Again, some people may not be familiar with the process. That's when we sit down with them and we walk them through the entire process, what's involved, what are their obligations, what are our obligations, and what's the best way to proceed. In some cases, people may have done some renovations or additions, so they're somewhat familiar and they only have specific questions which we address. Some people ask us, the first question is, hey, I live at this address, or I own this property. Can I build here? And the answer is, it depends. It's almost always depends for almost every question that they ask.
Right.
And the reason is, in different areas within the same city, sometimes you might have one house next to each other. One house can build a garden suite, the other one cannot. And in order to figure out...
How is that possible?
So the zoning requirements are such that, for example, if it's a corner lot, you can only build a certain distance from the main road, and you might not have enough backyard space to actually fulfill that requirement. Whereas your neighbor, who is just 10 feet away from you, can build no problem because they're far enough from the main road.
I see. So it's not even about municipality or zip code. It's literally about your plot of land.
Exactly. And on top of that, all of the municipality and zip codes affect it as well. In Toronto, you have kind of less restrictive requirements in terms of what you can build, how big, and etc. If you go to Richmond Hill, the requirements become much more stringent. You may not be able to build a basement in some areas, or the height may be severely limited. So that's something that many customers kind of are surprised to find out, and that's what part of the advice that we give. And that's kind of advice that we provide upfront without any cost to the customer, because they can't really pay for something that they don't even know if they can build.
Right. So I guess you'd have to start with the searches first and all of that.
So we do a couple of things. If we're familiar with the area, then we can sort of figure it out on our own. If we haven't dealt with that specific municipality, we might talk to their zoning department, we might check their website. In some cases, we'll even contact our architect who has experience in various areas, and we gather that information before providing it to the customers. So, as I mentioned, we first start with kind of information about where the location is. We need to find out if they can build. Once we know that they can build and they have the financing available, then we proceed with the survey. That's kind of one of the first things that needs to happen, where surveyor will come to your backyard and basically measure exactly where your lot is located, your property lines, all the heights, any kind of topography or anything in the backyard that they need to know about when building, because obviously you can't just build anywhere. You have to make sure you have either a leveled area or some kind of area that you need to take into consideration when building. Once the surveyor has that information, they provide that to the architect, and then the architect would have a couple of designs that usually customers choose from, or they come up with their own design together with the architect. The architect then places that building on that lot based on the survey provided. Once the lot or once the architectural design with the survey are complete, then we prepare the documentation for filing for permits and fill out all the documents. In some cases, there may be trees on the property that we have to take care of. In some cases, there may be a committee of adjustment, and I'll touch on that in a bit. So once we have all of that information ready, then we submit the application. In some cases, it's approved and we can proceed. In some cases, there is committee of adjustment that I just mentioned. Okay. And what that involves is if you have a lot that's a little bit smaller and you want to build a larger building, or you want it to be taller or a little bit closer to the property line than is normally allowed, you apply for committee of adjustment, where you have a panel of people from the city kind of review the documentation and maybe ask you any questions. More often than not, it would be the architect that would be asking. And then they make a decision whether they allow that extra space or extra height, or they don't. And we usually ask on a more conservative side to ensure that the process goes smoothly, and they're allowed. So now at this stage, the permit is issued and we start construction. Then the construction takes place roughly 6 months or so. Once that's done, then we do kind of any cleanup, any landscaping that needs to be done. Sometimes people will ask us to install some furniture once it's done. Now, our part sort of ends when we install appliances, but if they want to add any furniture, any extra things, for example, some people ask us to install solar panels or generators to kind of provide that backup power, because they use the garden suite as kind of their at-home office.
Oh, okay.
So we provide that service as well. And basically, once all of that is done, that's when we kind of finish, clean up anything that's left. And that's basically the entire process, from meeting the customer to handing them the keys.
And what happens in terms of the municipality after you finish this? Do you need to go back to them for any sort of closing up paperwork or finalization of that, or? So
during construction, there are a number of visits that the inspector from the city has to do. So once we start construction, we're usually excavating, and once excavation is done, someone from the city comes in to verify everything is done in accordance with the requirements. Then we proceed construction, and at different stages, the inspector comes in to verify that everything is done according to code and according to the permit that was issued. Once everything is completed and the landscaping is done, that's when the surveyor kind of issues a grading certificate, which is basically a paper saying everything is done as was originally agreed upon. That's when the inspector comes the one last time to double check everything, checks everything inside the building, that it was done according to the permit, and that's when they close the original permit. So that's when the process is officially done from the city's perspective. But after that, usually is when we install kind of any additional things that customer may want.
Oh, great. And I'm sure this is the number one question on people's minds. How much does it cost?
Yes, we often get that question, and I like to answer it with a similar question. If somebody asks you, how much does a car cost? Well, it could be, $10,000 car, or it could be $2 million car.
It's a very nice car.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why it really depends. Is it just kind of one floor, no basement, no second floor, very simple access? That could be maybe $200,000 if they don't want anything extra. Do we need to do the permits, or do they already have the permits? All of those things go into account. So the price can range from, as I mentioned, 200,000 upwards to 900,000. So many factors affect it. And I can just name a few things that go into pricing out a project. Number one is the location. Is it far from the city, far from kind of any municipalities or any of the main contractor stores? So if we have to drive to Muskoka to deliver materials, it would be much more expensive than just a corner lot around around Toronto. Another thing is, how easy is it to access the backyard? Because the machinery has to get there. If they have very large open access, we can bring in larger machinery, so it's much faster and easier for us to do. Whereas if it's a smaller access, maybe some of the work has to be done by hand, which is obviously much more time consuming and expensive. Then, of course, the size of the garden suite. If it's 2 stories with a basement, it would be much more expensive than just a single floor. And what kind of finishes do they want as well?
Right.
Because you can put in, cheap carpet, or you can put Venetian marble. So of course the prices are going to differ.
Right. And I guess the thing on everyone's minds is, we're having a little bit of kind of repeat of COVID, but also not when it comes to materials, right? Because I imagine this conversation about tariffs and things are most likely going to be putting a delay on things like they did during COVID. Do you find that's happening at all? How does this tariffs conversation come in? You don't have to answer this, by the way. I threw it at you out of nowhere.
Actually, no, I have no problem answering. You would be surprised that we were not affected as much as we thought we would.
Okay.
Because most of the lumber for construction is right here in Ontario.
Local.
So we don't need to worry about any tariffs or any delays there. The reason it affected us during COVID is because the lumber yards were closed. So we literally couldn't get it anywhere. Now it's not an issue for us. Same thing with steel and with concrete. Those are local materials that we don't need to rely on the States for. Some of the more specific materials, if there is kind of a requirement for some type of heat recovery ventilator, that may be delayed. However, we take that into account, and if we know that, because we already know what kind of garden suite it's going to be, we order those well ahead of time. So I'll give you an example. On one of the properties, we had to install, it's a special device that you install in a pipe in order to recover heat from drained water from like a shower. And they were not available anywhere locally, so we had to order it from the States. But we knew that ahead of time. So as soon as we signed the documents and received the permit, we placed the order. And that was about 3 months before we actually needed it. The part arrived in 2 months, but by that time we were well ahead in construction. So we used it and there were no delays during the process. And that's what we try to do, to get ahead of any potential delays or issues, to make sure that the process proceeds as smoothly as possible.
And that sounds amazing and very proactive. But what happens in the situation that that option is no longer available because now you have an added 25, 30, whatever percentage on it? Do you sort of have that figured out yet in terms of where else do we go to find this piece that we need?
So there are 2 options there. Option number 1 is we tell the customer, look, we can order it from the States, but because of the tariffs, the price is going to be this much extra. The other alternative is we can do a redesign for that particular unit. So if it's insulation, for example, we had to order, a heat pump that had to have certain specs because of the insulation package that they selected. So we can come to the customer and say, look, we can do apply for a review or revision for that permit in order to use different insulation, which would eliminate the need for that part. In that case, yes, you may have an increased cost of whatever it costs to apply for the revision, which might be just $100 or $200 versus an extra potentially $5,000 to $10,000 for that part. So we have a couple of solutions in those cases as well.
That's great.
It's kind of related to the tariffs question. We had some people asking us, is now a good time to build? Because, there is the uncertainty with tariffs.
Right.
Will we be able to? Is it going to be an issue? And we always tell them, look, the construction costs are not going to get cheaper, even if the threat of tariffs is removed. If you look at, 10 years ago, there was no COVID, nothing, and construction prices were slowly increasing regardless of anything. So if you want to build because of, your parents, children, or business, whatever the case may be, you might as well do it now and avoid the uncertainty of what may happen in the future. You might run into a situation where some prices for some materials reduce in price. Overall, the cost is not going to go down.
So the time is always yesterday.
Yeah, the best time to build was, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Next best time is right now.
Right now. So Andrei, what happens, or have you had a situation where clients call you and they say, I have this structure in my backyard. I'm getting a threatening letter from the municipality. Whoever built it was not permitted. What do I do now?
Yes, we've had a couple of those situations where somebody would buy a house with a deck and then they find out that the deck wasn't permitted and the city tells them you have to remove it because there is no permit for the deck. So if it's a deck that you wanted to remove, then by all means, go ahead and get rid of it. If it's a nice deck that looks solid, we offer that service as well, where we come out with our engineer and an architect who will take soil samples. They will measure everything and make sure that the construction is solid, that it's done according to the engineering principles and the limitations that the city imposes. In some cases, what may be required is reinforcing a couple of columns or reinforcing maybe the load carrying structure, and the deck can remain. You will still need to apply for the permit kind of retroactively. The city doesn't have an issue with those permits as long as everything is done in accordance with the building codes and the requirements. And then you get a permitted deck. Although sometimes it can be stressful, we do solve that problem as well.
That's amazing. Andrei, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I've learned a lot, so I'm sure our listeners feel the same way. And for those that are wanting to retain you and build something like this, how can someone reach you?
So they can reach us at our website, chateaugarden.ca, our Instagram, Chateau Garden Suites, as well as our phone number, 647-367-7065. Those are the best ways to reach us. And send us an email. We can talk about your project.
Great. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by ALF LLP. We hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. This is a kind reminder that our content is intended for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute as legal advice. Every situation is unique. So if you need legal support, we encourage you to book a consultation with one of our lawyers on our website, alfllp.ca. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others. For more engaging conversations, expert insights, and practical advice, follow us on social media at @ALFLLP. That's where you can find our podcast, Law That Leads. Thanks again for listening, and more importantly, drive safe.